Treasury bonds, we're going to declare you terrorists, we're going to assassinate your leaders, and we're going to declare war against you. That's the U.S. response.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're honored to have our esteemed guest, Dr. Jim Willie, with us today. Dr. Jim Willie is a renowned financial expert and macro analyst specializing in the global economy. He's also the editor of the newsletter Hat Trick Letter, widely known as the Golden Jackass. You can find that at www.golden-jackass.com. If you haven't heard of Jim Willie, I urge you to do so. Do your research on this man. He is a treasure trove of wisdom and insight. Somebody that should be featured on CNN, Fox News, Bloomberg to provide the real facts instead of all the usual rhetoric that you get from the mainstream news. Jim, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here. Thank you for joining us on such short notice.
I'll be on those shows in due time after they convert to the truth, after they get bought out, after they drop 90% in value from completely lost viewing audience. CNN has lost between 85 and 90% of its viewing audience in the last 7 years.
Yeah, not surprised. Everybody's now switching to alternative media sources.
Here's a really tough question for you. If their audience is down over 80%, that means their revenue is down over 80% to stay in operation. So how do they stay in operations with such a huge decline in their revenue? I believe Langley Narcotics.
I can see that. Narcotics.
If Langley's in control of content and they suffer from lost audience, then I think it falls on Langley to make up the difference. Okay. All right. That's just a controversial point to start off right away.
Yeah, that's some great insight because it's true.
How about we call them the narco mainstream news networks?
You could get away with that. Yeah.
Okay.
Very clever.
There's a lot going on. Where do you want to start here, Versan?
Yeah. So as you know, much to discuss. I do want to start with the situation in Japan. I remember the last time we did speak, you mentioned Japan was selling U.S. debt. Recently, I just read an article stating that Japan has sold over $400 billion worth of U.S. debt. Personally, I believe this is going to severely impact the U.S. Treasury and potentially forcing Japan to eventually finance their own debt. And the only way I personally see this viable is through tokenizing and monetizing their debt on the XRP ledger, which aligns with some of the statements every major bank in Japan that will use XRP by 2025. You did also mention that gold would be the safe haven and eventually replace treasuries as a store of value. So I guess we can start with the situation in Japan. Just bring us up to speed on the current situation. And of course, we'll shift our focus then onto the global economy and how it fits into the broader narrative and even a potential of a debt market collapse.
Yeah, I tell you, this is one of the hairiest situations the modern world has ever seen. We're having a debt default of the global currency reserve, the Treasury bond. Now, you said something that I don't think is quite accurate. You said the Japanese have sold 400 billion. Now, they've got a plan to sell 400 billion. That's going to take a few months. That's going to take maybe several months. But putting on notice their intention to sell a lot of Treasury bonds will lead to other nations saying, oh my gosh, let's get ours done before them. So we don't have quite as much damage. So it starts a waterfall. Now, the Japanese, you got to get a little bit of history here in order to understand what's going on and all the various dynamics. In 1945, the United States was victorious over Japan. As a result, we eliminated their military. We put the U.S. military in Okinawa. That's caused tremendous problems, even for the locals, regarding, let's just say, men misbehaving with the local women and not being prosecuted for their misbehavior. You know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
All right. The United States has basically run their central bank. They call it Bank of Japan. The United States has basically run the Bank of Japan for 70 years. Okay.
Right.
And it's Wall Street that runs it. You could get really complicated about this, but the United States imposes its interests on Japan. Now, Japan created a very big problem for themselves in the 1980s and 1990s. The problem was that they were very successful. Germany had the same problem 10 years ago. They didn't have enough debt to sell.
Wow.
And therefore, their interest rate went really negative because they didn't have sufficient supply to match up against the demand. Okay, everything's upside down, all right?
Yes.
Okay, Japan was looking for assistance and advice. How are we going to manage this? Like around, let's just call it 1990, 91, and 92. So the United States said, look, you've got way too much surplus.
Interesting.
You need to do something because it's causing a lot of problems. I mean, everything is upside down. The United States got power from its exported debt. It's upside down. The Japanese had too much high volume trade surpluses, and their currency got strong. So the United States helped them to make their currency weaker. We're good at destruction, good at weakening, we're good at debilitation. So what they did was they said, why don't you undermine your currency by going down to 0%? It's around 1990. I don't have the exact date. I don't really care. I remember it like it was yesterday because I was a kid. I was 1990. I was 38 years old. I remember the Arab oil embargo, 1973. I graduated from college that year and had a lot of problems getting gasoline. I remember these things, and my age is now an advantage. I'm 72, and you don't remember, things like the Arab embargo and all the different aspects of that in 72. You weren't around. You were a glimmer in your mother's eye. Japanese took the advice, there's a gun. Well, okay, we'll take that advice. Okay, so they went to 0%. And that's where ZIRP came into being as an acronym, zero interest rate policy. And I just have a quick diversion. In 2008, after Lehman and early 09, I said the United States is going to go to the zero interest rate policy. And I got more stupid mail than I've ever gotten in my 20 years of the newsletter. Oh, Jim, that's ridiculous. The United States is not Japan. I said, no, we're worse. We don't have any industry. Okay. All right.
Point.
So the United States worked to impose a 0% policy in Japan. Their currency immediately went down. So what it meant was they could still sell Toyotas and Hondas in the United States without having them be too expensive. You see the advantage?
Right.
Okay, this is a really important point. If they hadn't gone to 0%, their Toyotas would have been priced out of the market and they would have lost their giant export. They call it an export industry. They're exporting cars, motorcycles, cameras, personal computers, all kinds of things. And that entire export trade gave them a surplus. And it was put at risk by their currency kept going up, up, up. Oh, wait, we got a problem. We need to stop our currency from going. Okay, 0%, fix that. Now, this is going to get really weird for your audience because I don't think many people are aware of this.
Please expand.
Wall Street, okay, I've actually talked with some rather prominent analysts who didn't know about this. And I read about it in Barron's in the 1990s. Barron's is so much better than the Wall Street Journal. All right. What I learned was that Wall Street was borrowing yen in Japan, converting it to dollars and buying treasuries in the United States. let's just say 1 trillion at a shot. Okay. They were earning 6% on what they borrowed at zero. They were taking free money in Japan. How would you like, Versan, to borrow 0% and invest in 6% bonds? Would you say, let's back up the truck?
Probably.
Okay, that's what Wall Street did. They backed up the truck. I've got to get to the more detailed because now it's breaking. It's breaking. There's no free lunch. There can be a free lunch for a while, but eventually the free lunch stops. Then it's time to, let's pay now we suffer the consequences for the benefit that we took advantage of all those years. Let's just focus on $1 trillion. Okay, they were earning $60 billion per year doing nothing. Okay, it's called the yen carry trade. Borrow yen, move it to dollars, buy treasuries at 6%. That's roughly what it was. It wasn't exactly, but for argument's sake, let's go with 6%. 6% is $60 billion per trillion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, right now, I got to be honest with you. You cannot find a lot of figures on this kind of activity. I read about it in 1990 decade with my barons, and I learned this is in the low trillions. That's what they said. Low trillions. I think they lied. It was in the higher trillions, medium trillions. All right. It's now 20 trillion.
Okay.
They borrowed $20 trillion at 0%. And with that 20 trillion, they're earning $1.2 trillion a year for doing nothing.
Interesting.
Okay? Now, does that show up on the JP Morgan balance sheet, the Citibank balance sheet, the Goldman Sachs balance sheet, the Bank of America balance sheet, even maybe the Wells Fargo balance sheet, because they participate. They're like West Coast Wall Street. The answer, and Goldman Sachs balance sheet. The answer is hell no. So where'd it go? It went to their private bank accounts in Switzerland and the Caribbean. Okay, this is mafia profit.
Interesting.
All right.
Central banking, really?
Well, it's the owners of the central bank. I didn't say central bank. I said Wall Street.
No, I'm saying central banking because they're the ones behind this. A lot of it.
The central bankers can participate, but I said Wall Street. I said it 3 times. Wall Street. Did it show up on the Wall Street balance sheets for profit? Did they share it with the stockholders? No. Where'd it go? Bonuses, slush funds in Switzerland, slush funds in the Caribbean, Cayman Island, Bermuda, all the British strongholds. Okay, I'm not talking about central banks. We'll get to them later. This is Wall Street.
Okay.
This is New York banks. Wall Street made, for every trillion, they earned $60 billion a year. And I think most of it was off the balance sheet. All right, now you get an idea of what it is. Now, let's now get to how things went bad, because they go bad. I mean, the world changes and suddenly, well, my gosh, our formula doesn't work anymore. It was 2.5 years ago, the Bank of Japan sold a boatload of treasury bonds. They sold between October of 21 and October of 22. I've told this many times in different shows. They sold $180 billion of treasury bonds. Now, a regular intelligent person would say, well, if Japan is selling treasury bonds, then the dollar would go down.
Mm-hmm.
But the dollar went up because the yen went down. The yen is an unbacked Forex currency. Like the euro, like the pound, the yen. What's the basis? They got a gold basis? No, they got a nothing basis. They got a fiat basis. The good faith and confidence in the United States dollar. U.S. government, rather. I like to say the dollar is backed by the U.S. military, not the U.S. government.
Yes.
So here's the twist. This is a paradox, Versan. This is not simple. The Japanese central bank sold $180 billion worth of treasury bonds, and they did not keep it in dollar form. They moved it to gold. They moved it to Japanese bank stocks. Okay? The value of the yen is determined by the dollar reserves as the foundation for their yen. They moved the treasury bonds and they moved it into largely gold. They announced they were going to move it toward the gold standard because they could see what's going on with the Biden show, and the debt, the deficit going crazy, the debt going crazy, everything accelerating. So given that the yen had a lower dollar reserve, the yen went down because they sold treasuries and didn't keep it in the dollar. The yen dollar reserve went down. Therefore, the yen lost value when they sold dollar instruments. That's a paradox. And I said it 3 times so it can sink in.
Yeah.
The key to a foreign currency that's a major Forex currency is maintaining their dollar reserve as foundation for that currency. The Japanese yen went down 22%. And a lot of Americans were confused at the time because the yen is reported as dollar yen. The dollar yen went up. And some people thought, well, my gosh, the yen went up. No, the dollar went up. Dollar yen went up. It went up from 100 to about 140. Okay. Now, if you think that's a minor issue, you're dead wrong.
Yeah.
Oh, you're dead wrong. A 3% move in a currency is a lot. So the Japanese immediately saw their foreign owners of their government debt dump their equivalent of treasury. They call it Japanese government bond. They call it JGB. JGBs. Japanese government bond. JGBs. Foreigners suddenly took a 20% loss. Bang! Just like that. 20% loss on Japanese government debt. So the Japanese said, we need to print money to buy our own debt to prevent problems. And by printing more money, their currency went down from 22 to 25% down. Then their bank stocks and their stock market got in trouble. Their JGBs, the interest rate went up. And they had to print more money to fix more problems. And finally, they made a very big decision. We're going to have to go to the gold standard in a big way. And that's where the Rockefellers started assassinating their mid-level leaders.
Yes.
Okay, this is a very big game. So the Japanese have been gradually now, until the last couple months, have been gradually dumping their treasuries and providing the BRICS nations with a really good example. This is a case study. This is a case study in a master's program in finance. What happens when a major Forex country sells a lot of treasury bonds fast and doesn't keep it in dollar form? Their currency goes down. It's a paradox. So the Japanese are now going more aggressively toward the gold standard. They announced 6 months ago, about 6 months, because this ended in October of 22. And they've been in a crisis ever since. They've been in an 18-month crisis. They've been in a 20-month crisis. They have not gotten out of the crisis, okay? Now, I've not even gotten to the yen carry trade. I'm just talking about this financial crisis in Japan. This is very complicated, a lot of moving parts. So foreigners basically dumped their government debt, the Japanese government debt. The Japanese are buying their own. They're printing money like crazy. They had real big problems with their banks. Their banks were holders of treasury bonds, and they were losing money. Wall Street banks were losing money on the bond principal, 40% loss. And now the Japanese announced a few weeks ago, I think 2 weeks ago, they're going to sell $400 billion worth of Treasury bonds. They owned, at that time, they owned about $850 billion. They went from a trillion, which is 1,000 billion. They sold 180 billion. So they're a little above 800 billion. Now they want to sell half of what they have. Whoa.
Yeah.
You try to sell all those Treasury bonds, we're going to declare you terrorists, we're going to assassinate your leaders, and we're going to declare war against you. That's the U.S. response.
Of course.
Okay.
Naturally.
All right. They've not gotten out of the crisis yet. They're suffering price inflation. And here's just a really interesting side question. If their currency is down 25%, it's been gyrating recently. I'll get to that in a minute. Does that mean that they offer the Toyota cars at the California ports? Does it mean that they've dropped the price 20%?
No.
They pocket the profit. They could say, we're going to give a 10% discount and we're going to undercut the U.S. auto industry and drive it into the hole. But they don't. They took a bigger profit, and now it's up to the Japanese government. Are they going to tax it like a windfall profit? That's what we did in the United States in the 1980s, windfall profit tax on oil. All these parts are very interesting. Now, let's get to the yen carry trade, because we just described on the table a $20 trillion arbitrage.
Yes.
That's what you call it when you do one thing against another. Let's do one against the other and profit on that differential. And there are lots of different arbitrages, like low, what do you call it? Short-term maturity versus long-term maturity in Treasury bond. That's another arbitrage.
A lot of people don't know that one of the key drivers of the global market is the yen exchange rate. I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah. Well, they're a big exporter, so
Right.
They're in the mix. Now, let's get back to the yen carry trade. You got 20 trillion. I like to focus on 1 trillion, and then whatever it is, multiplied by the volume. All right, so let's take 1 trillion that's on the table. Well, now think of it in terms of Wall Street. Don't get confused by saying, well, what's happening to the Japanese? We already covered that. Let's focus on Wall Street now, because that's command center for the 20 trillion in the yen carry trade. Wall Street saw the yen go down. The yen went down. The borrowed 20 trillion went down. Okay? They saw a 25% decline in the yen. So that's a 5 trillion discount on what they have to pay back. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, that's all well and good, but remember, arbitrage has two sides, so don't get caught up on one side. I'm just giving you perspective. They had a 25% discount on what they borrowed, and they had a 40% decline on what they invested in. They just lost 8 trillion after getting a 5 trillion discount on their borrow.
Wow.
They got a net of 3 trillion. They're now in the hole for 3 trillion. Those Wall Street second books in the Caribbean and Switzerland, they're 3 trillion in the hole. All right. So they're trying to get Japan to stop to stop selling their Treasury bonds. We don't want you to make the Treasury bond situation worse. We're trying to, this is Wall Street. I'm on the Wall Street side now. I'm the Wall Street perspective. We want you to help us with a bond rally. And Japan's saying, we're going to sell 400 billion. We've been your
prisoner. They just came out with a different response. They weren't expecting that, were they?
Therefore, I would expect in the next month or two to hear about some assassinations by our Rocky fella. Now, you know the movie Goodfellas?
Yeah.
Okay.
Great movie, by the way.
It's Italian mafia. I call it Rocky fella. Rocky fella is a mafia.
Yeah, they operate like one for sure.
They do. They're involved in the vaccine. They're involved in big pharma.
I mean, that's even what the IMF does. Doesn't the IMF have the economic hitman where they come in They put their
Yeah.
political leaders, and then they collapse your monetary system and come to you like a
Yeah,
Lone
IMF,
Star.
World Bank, and
Right.
you're a vassal state, and that was experienced in Pakistan and Sri Lanka in recent
Yeah.
years. All right, so now now you've got Wall Street in a real pickle.
Mhm.
Okay, this is going to get humorous in a minute. With Donald Trump, let's say, eyeing the White House with
Mhm.
ambitions now, and lots of falsified polls. Donald Trump is ahead by at least 50%, 50%, 50. They're saying it's neck and neck because that's how they try to steal an election. They're trying to produce, Versan, they're trying to produce a bond rally in the face of a default.
Yep. They were
They're
both saying that, by the way, Camilla too, and Trump.
They have to.
They have to.
We need to avoid a debt default because it means everything shuts down in the United States. We don't want everything to shut down in the United States. So we need time. And what the Japanese are saying is, we're not giving you time. We're dumping half of the 800 billion that we have. So we're trying to produce a bond rally, which is buyer's rally, when foreigners, including led by the BRICS, are selling treasury bonds in a big way.
Yes.
And I think we're depleting slowly. We're tapping the exchange stabilization fund, which is a totally different topic. That's like a $10-15 trillion slush fund managed by the New York Fed. One good question I have from a couple clients is, has the White Hats and the White Alliance taken control of the New York Fed? I don't know. I suspect yes. Okay, so Wall Street is in trouble. They do not want to announce a $3 trillion loss. They do not want to announce a $300 billion loss every month. They don't want to announce a $750 billion loss every quarter. A $1 billion loss is big. How's 750? All right, so we're facing a death threat to the Wall Street banks. Now, let me back up a little bit, because it's so much worse than what I'm describing.
Can imagine.
In the last couple of years of the Obama II administration, they did a strong arm coercion and basically stole $1.5 trillion of the Japanese government pension fund. And the government pension fund for Japan is for their citizens, not just government workers. The government manages a pension fund. Think of it as their version of Social Security. Well, Obama came in there and said, we're going to take the whole 1.5 trillion. If you don't like it, we got a gun to your head. You don't have a military. We're going to take 1.5 trillion because we need treasury bond buyers. In addition to the 20 trillion in the yen carry trade managed by the Wall Street banks, there's another 1.5 trillion that the Japanese pension fund is holding, and it's going to shit too.
Yeah.
Okay, Japan is facing a death threat. Okay, that is what's going on. And they see the only way out of this is to get rid of their treasury bonds and to buy gold and go to the gold standard as quickly as possible. And here's what's ironic. I talked about paradox before, but now we're talking irony. Japan is acting more like a BRICS nation than any of the BRICS nations.
That's what I was going to say.
They're de-dollarizing and more rapidly than any of the other countries. Russia started it. They actually de-dollarized in a matter of like less than 2 years following the takeover of Ukraine. They call it the Maidan coup because it's the Maidan Square. I mean, if they did a coup in New York, they might call it the Times Square coup because that's the location. The Maidan is to Kiev what Times Square and Wall Street is to New York. We're only in about the second inning of 9 for the U.S. government debt default. And what Japan has done is that they're forcing it into the third and fourth inning quickly. When governments want to dump a lot of treasury bonds, hey, look, if they were to dump 20 or 30 billion dollars, that's a lot. They said 400. So this is going to have to happen in like 20, 30, 50 different steps. That's why I made the point early. They hadn't finished this. They're planning this.
Well, they're planning to do it. That's correct. Yes.
Now, if they're planning to do it, let's just say in $20 billion blocks, they're not going to get 100 cents on the dollar. Okay, what we're going to see is a more publicized version of bond haircut to make it more clear that Japan is forcing a U.S. government debt default. They're going to be forcing a debt default for the U.S. Treasury bond.
Yes, that's correct.
That's global. That's not United States. That's global. It's going to be globally imposed a default on the U.S. Treasury bond. It's a security. We're going to default on a security. Its home is the United States.
Yes.
And it securitizes U.S. government debt. Now, if we have a bond default, we're going to have a U.S. government debt default. If we have a bond default, we're going to have to shut down 2/3 of the U.S. government. And that's exactly what Trump wants to do. Shut down 2/3 of the rubbish and useless agencies, like the Department of Energy, the Department of Education, the Department of Interior. Shut them down. They don't do a damn thing.
They really don't. The Department of Education doesn't do anything. I mean, kids are getting better education at home.
The Department of Education does bad education. They do worse than nothing.
That's right.
They're imposing the lesbian, gay, queer. They're imposing diversity. They're asking the kids, what's your pronoun? You know, I asked my sister, I was just joking around with her. I said, hey, sis, what's your favorite pronoun? She said, bitch. And I said, well, it's funny. Mine's jackass. But, you know, it's not a pronoun. That's not a pronoun. That's a metaphor. All right. Where's this going to go? Japan is now forcing the issue. And notice that it's global. I mean, even the Russian stock market went down almost 2%. This is global. This is so much bigger than Evergrande in China, and that was big.
It triggered a sell-off in the stock market like we haven't seen since what was it, like 1980 something, right?
I think it was 87 with Black Monday. And I could tell that story, but no need now because we're trying to stay on point.
Yeah.
What is Japan going to force here? My guess is that they're going to force a higher gold price. They're going to be moving a lot of treasury bonds to gold. They're going to make it really hard for the U.S. government and the Fed. The Fed is run now and owned by Wall Street. This is a 2-year-old item of news that most people don't know. The Fed is not owned by the Geneva, Group of 8 or whatever they call themselves. It was about 2 or 3 years ago. In fact, I think it was actually March of 2020 with Trump in office. He took over control of the Fed. And it got spread among the Wall Street banks because this is funny. They don't want some interloper setting market rates. They want the Wall Street banks to do it because that's where the bank cartel is centered. So the bank cartel said, well, we'll buy the Fed. And 35% owner is JP Morgan. They run the Fed. That's why I expect the Treasury Secretary very likely is going to be Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan. And I'm not really worried about that. Of course, he's got a terrible resume. Of course.
Yeah, I was going to say, why would they put him in there? I know it's strategic.
So he can do what he's told. And if he doesn't, he'll get his neck stretched. Come on. Yeah. So they can control policy. Remember, JP Morgan was the most guilty bank with Epstein Enterprises. They've got JP Morgan captured. Notice that in the last 2 days, gold has held up very well. I think because Japan's buying gold. They're selling treasuries and they're buying gold, and they're not done. And when the crisis smoke clears, gold's going to go up a lot higher. I think it's almost a guaranteed to be over 2,700 by the end of the year. Now, why is silver down during all this mayhem? Because there's a widespread impression now that the consensus is gathering. Holy moly, unbelievable. We have a recession. And silver is a metal that reflects the economy. So with an economic recession, they sell silver. Now, that has nothing to do with reduced solar panel sales and silver purchased by India for their solar industry. No, it has to do with, oh my gosh, we got a recession. Well, I got news for people. We lie about the inflation rate by 6 to 7%. Therefore, we lie about the economic growth by the same 6 or 7%. We're in a 5% depression, and it's in its third year. So silver was doing well, even though we were in a depression. Now we're in a more perceived recession, which is a joke. We're in a depression. It's going to get worse. I think we're in a minus 5% depression, and we're in like an 8 or 9 or 10% price inflation environment. Inflationary depression. Gold goes up because of the crisis. Silver goes up because of the inflation and the new industries coming in. Solar is just one of several coming in. All right, we're going to see a big recovery. They're making a coiled spring now. A slingshot effect is coming for silver. If you're a silver holder and you got the ability to buy more, quit looking at your balance sheet and start looking at the discount. This is a big discount by criminals who are running a criminal market.
That's right.
All right. Now, there's more. There's so much more. The Japanese pension fund, they're going to be wanting also to get out of the treasury bonds, and they're going to take a haircut. And we don't know what they're going to buy. They might buy Japanese, Topics and Nikkei, their stock market. Topics, I think, is Korea. Sorry. Nikkei. They're probably going to support their own stock market. Dump the treasuries, screw the Americans, and buy their own stock. And they're going to be talking about how the Rockefellers are killing their leaders. And it's not one or two. The Japanese had been working with China for a regional gold-backed currency. And the ones who are interested in the BRICS membership, including not just the members, but the ones applying and the ones beginning to prepare for their application, it's 85% of the global economy and 90% of the global population. When you include the 1.3 trillion of India and the 1.3 trillion of China, you get a big slice of the global population. Now, I got to make a comment that this is difficult for a lot of people to comprehend, and I want to make it as simple as possible. When the dollar got discharged in Japan in the form of the treasury bond, the dollar went up in value. Now, I explained to you the paradox, but then you said a minute ago the dollar is going to have a global devaluation.
Well, insolvency in the dollar.
It's going to have a tremendous insolvency problem. It's going to go up in value.
Yeah, it's going to get stronger naturally in the short term. That's how they're going to play this, aren't they?
Well, you can use short term, midterm, and all these fancy words. The dollar is going to be a supernova. It's going to go up, 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 and then explode.
Right.
It's not going to go down. Okay, this is really a sensitive area. But when the dollar is devalued, what's going to go up? The euro?
Gold, right?
Exactly. The dollar index does not include gold. It's 52% the euro. Then you got yen and British pound, and I think, I'm not sure whether the yuan is in there, but I focus on the 52% euro. Is the European economy doing well? No.
No.
Is the German economy facing a death incident? Yeah. Is France in turmoil? Yeah. Is Netherlands in turmoil? Yeah. Is Italy in trouble? Spain in trouble? Yeah. So the euro is not going up. The dollar's not going down. The dollar will not go down. What will go up will be gold. Gold is called the super currency. So when you get a dollar devaluation, two things happen. Gold goes up and the price of everything you buy goes up.
Right.
The
Inflation.
valuation of the dollar is in the form of local domestic price inflation and global gold increase in value.
Right. Because of loss of purchasing power as well. That's what I meant when I said devaluation as well.
Loss of
So it gets
purchasing power.
stronger, but the price of goods and services goes up because the dollar is so strong as well. So
it's because it's a combination of things. It's really not as simple as that, because we're printing money to cover our debt because we can't find buyers. And when we do that, we're forcing price inflation, and we're essentially devaluing the dollar domestically in the form of price inflation. Okay, I said there's a lot of moving parts here.
Of course.
Now, I'm telling you, sometimes my head is spinning. I read a few articles and I go, holy mackerel, I got to digest this. Where do you want to go from here?
I want to shift our focus to the geopolitical landscape. I guess we can talk about the BRICS nations. They are actively de-dollarizing, like you said, buying gold, and essentially laying the groundwork for a new economic order. So, like you said, the dollar is undeniably failing. Confidence is eroding, and its purchasing power is dwindling. See, the thing is, I think the globalists, they know this. The neocons, obviously, they're aware of this, and I think they're attempting to divert public attention from a failing system and the inevitable $175 trillion debt crisis by pushing us into war. They're trying to incite anger, hatred towards people in the Middle East with whom we have no real conflict with. So I'm just curious, you can go into all of that, but why do you think like these certain factions like the Zionists that are hiding behind the Israeli flag, collaborating with the United States military industrial complex, are pushing us into war? Is this because they have no control anymore of what's going on?
You mentioned a name beginning with a Z that I never mentioned.
That's okay.
And well, I'm trying to warn you.
Thank you.
Leave that word alone. I got death threats in 2006, and it was from using that word.
I appreciate that. Thank you for the warning.
All right. It was 2006. One was from Homeland Security, a death threat, and the other one was from Swiss bankers. So now you know where they live. There is a lot of confusion regarding this war. I'm going to put something in simple terms, and then I'm going to get more complex. The Ukraine war is one of the largest disasters in modern history. They actually tell the Ukrainian people, we're winning the war. Let's keep at it. We're winning the war. We're driving the Russians out. They're suffering terrible losses. You got to turn it completely around. Ukraine has suffered like 300 to 400,000 deaths. They're suffering something like 30,000 dead per month. They're running out of people. They ran out of young men. It's going to, okay. When the Ukraine war winds down, they need a new war. This is really sick stuff. Now, I have a point that I angered my father. He passed away in 2020. But I angered my sister now because she's the only one left to anger. I say, sis, we need another war because we are a country run by the narcos since Papa Bush, 1988. We're a narco presidency that you don't see because you don't study this stuff. Papa Bush, Clinton, Baby Bush, Obama, 4 narcos. And for those who aren't really aware, President Biden, or the fake resident, or little p resident Biden, that's just Obama in his 3rd term. So it's the narco presidents are continuing. What they've done is they've wrecked our economy. They've wrecked the dollar. They've wrecked the government debt. But what they've done is they've made damn well sure that we have a war all the time. We had 9/11. We blamed it on a guy living in a cave in Afghanistan. No, wait a minute. My friend Ahmad, who was Pakistani, told me that Osama bin Laden lived in Karachi, Pakistan. All right. So everything about the story is bullshit. It's all wrong. So we have a war in Iraq. Well, we're told there that we're going in there to stop their weapons of mass destruction because they're going to destroy Israel. Now, I'm going to tell you a really quick one. It was Bill and Mark. It was 2009. And I was going to do a marketing plan with them for the newsletter, but I didn't like their plan. So I said, no, thank you. But I got to know them. And Mark said to me, well, I just, finished a tour. I said, tour, what, military? And he said, yeah, I was working for Halliburton. I said, whoa, you got any stories? He said, sure do. And this is 2009. He said, I left them like 3 or 4 years ago. I said, tell me about the Iraq war. Is that where you were? And he said, yeah, we were doing cleanup. He said, there were weapons of mass destruction. We claim we never found any, but they were all sold by the Bush crowd to Iraq and Saddam. And that was intended to be for the Iran-Iraq war. Mark told me that Halliburton went in there to locate all the nerve gas and atomic bomb, nuclear weapons that Papa Bush sold to Iraq. And that was what they were concerned would be directed toward Israel. So then we came up with the story, well, we didn't find any gold. No, they stole all 44 tons of gold. No, we didn't find any weapons of mass destruction. Yes, we did. They were all U.S. markings. Okay, that's the one false war. And that's really, it only ended a few years ago. We have occupation, and we built the Green Zone, the largest embassy in the world, the Green Zone in Baghdad, and that's going to turn into a large shopping mall before long. Okay, then we went to the Afghanistan war. Then we went to the Syrian war. We need a new war, Versan. Come on, get with the program. So that's part of the simplistic thinking. We're going to have to continue the military budget, but it can't be over there with Ukraine. We have to move it over here to Israel.
Yeah. Well, what's the saying? Every war's the banker's war.
Every war is a banker's war. But, the military industrial complex is not bankers.
Right.
The bankers.
But what's their end game besides profits and death, destruction?
Power, profits. They enjoy blowing things up. They enjoy
testing out new technologies, but for what purpose? What end game? That's my question.
Let me give you another little quick story.
Sure.
I had in 1976, I was getting my master's. It was Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, PA, and I only had one office mate. There wasn't a real popular program at that time. The next couple of years, it got much bigger. I had an office mate, and he was from the American University of Beirut. And he said, Jim, are you aware of why Israel destroyed Lebanon and Beirut? And I said, no, tell me the story. I know it's ugly. He said, well, Beirut made a pitch with the Saudis and UAE to be their bank for oil sales. And Israel said, not on our border. And Israel destroyed Beirut. And there's no war crimes. There were no prosecutions. It was all blamed as, well, Arab hostilities and Arab threats, terrorism. And oh my gosh, this is going to get really delicate here, Versan. And you know that it's going to get delicate. And we both expect this. For those who are just too ignorant to tie your shoes, Hamas was created by the Israeli government in order to bifurcate the Palestinians and the Arabs in Gaza.
It's true. Yep.
It is well known. It has been cited by congressmen in the United States. It was well known at the time. Obama talked openly about it, how it was a good idea to create Hamas in order to give them a voice. But privately, it was to control their voice. Controlled opposition is an element here. This is extremely delicate, and I'm going to be very careful of the words I use. Where do you want to go from here? What's next? What do you want to talk about regarding Israel, Gaza, and all that?
We can shift on to some of the other subjects. I understand we are going down.
We're not done. We're not done with this. We're not done with this.
Well,
what do you want to talk about?
Okay, I'll ask that. But for the audience, I do want to interject a second. I do want to share with them that I wrote a paper on this before, but Hamas is a rogue group and operation that was originally, like you said, funded by way before the Obamas, the Clintons, the Bushes, after illegally invading the Iraq under false pretenses that were engineered through even September 9/11 attacks, created and funded ISIS as well. And if you follow the money today, you can actually trace those deals that were made. People don't want to face the facts, but Israel, the country, has always been really another stronghold for the United States military industrial complex, Mossad alliance in the Middle East. And they are trying to push their war and agenda on the Muslim religion, really, and the people, because they're not bending to a one world government corporate agenda. That's really what it was for a long time. I understand that sometimes, see, the way we look at it from a financial perspective is that they need a reason to go to war so they can keep creating debt, so they can try to sustain their debt-based system that is now failing, and that's becoming unsustainable. So that's from like the financial perspective. But what is really the end game in the Middle East there? Is this because the globalists are losing control? Is this because they're threatened with the dollar collapsing and they're losing their control of their system? What is the real objective here? Because, I mean, this is just committing genocide, really.
You've got to think in terms of a constant military budget, and they're locked in together, because when we have more military budget, it adds to our debt. We don't pay for our own military budget. We don't pay for much of anything.
That's why we have debt, because we don't pay our bills.
We had the Iraq War. Then we had the Afghanistan War. Then after that, we wind down Afghanistan. We have the Ukraine War. That's winding down, and we have the Israeli War. Now, Trump has called it the last war. Why would he call it the last war? Because we're running out of places to have a war. We're running out of potential wars. What are we going to do? Have a war in Argentina? I don't think so. A war in Venezuela? Maybe Venezuela. Now, that's not an Arab war. That'll be an oil war. Oh, yeah, oil. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Guyana has a lot of oil right next door. That's part of what's going on. But I don't want to get off point. They need another war, period. They need to sustain weapon sales, period. Get it through your head.
You don't think that it's possible they need the war also to collapse the current system so they can probably bring in the new one that they've been setting the stage for?
That's a possible outcome, that inevitable for the evil cabal side in power.
Right.
Now that is a very big point. I'm glad you brought it up, because I didn't plan on talking about it. But if the cabal sees that there is an end to this, let's just say, the Israeli-Gaza war, and an end at the same time to the U.S. government debt and the Treasury bond default, the cabal is going to want to impose their will for a solution. Out of chaos is order, the Hegelian dialect. But when there's a collapse, you have other people in the room. The White Alliance has their plan, and it's gold standard.
Yeah.
And BRICS has a global trade union, not an Eastern, global. Mexico is looking into BRICS membership. So when the cabal is thinking, well, we're going to impose the central bank digital currency and credit scoring in banks, The East says no. The White Alliance says no. No, we're not doing that. We're going to the gold standard. Kiss my ass. Get out of the room. Mm-hmm. You're not in control. Okay. There's a big risk by the cabal forcing a war that has an end soon. Notice that Netanyahu doesn't want any truce talks. He's just kicking out anybody who wants to talk truce, talk peace, just like Zelensky did. Those morons in Ukraine had a truce conference and they didn't even invite Russia. How stupid is that?
It was stupid.
Okay.
Right. That's not real peace then.
Well, no, what they were doing is they were making a conference to find out how are we going to sustain the funding for the war effort. I'm telling you, it's about how do we keep the war going? How do we keep the weapons sales going? How do we keep the U.S. government budget for military at $840 and not cut it down to $600? They're not going to cut it $200 billion. They're going to make a new war. Right. These are Satanists.
Yes. I didn't want to mention that, but it's true. Yes, they're Luciferian.
Luciferian, you could call it that.
Whatever you want.
Yeah, you know, this is really complex, and I don't want to get too deep into this one side area, but the Luciferians are actually going to be working with the White Alliance to bring down the Satanists. Think of Wall Street as being Luciferian and Geneva as being Satanist, and they're not friends anymore. Okay, I just said that. Leave it alone. I talked about that in my March newsletter. So
I understand. Yeah, it's okay. So let me just kind of.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm just saying the March newsletter contained that. So if you want to read more, sign up for the newsletter on golden-jackass.com.
Absolutely. Right. And the link will be in the description. Please continue.
I want to get with Trump and Vance. Okay. Now, I've been very carefully watching Trump's comments and Vance. Trump speaks out of Vance's mouth. Trump doesn't talk much about this topic. He talks out of Vance's mouth. What Vance has said is we need to rescue the hostages that Hamas holds. And I ask a very difficult, controversial question. Are the Hamas hostages, namely Israeli soldiers and Israeli citizens, are they held by the Israeli military?
You're asking me this?
Well, it's rhetorical, but it's also to you.
Oh, rhetorical. I'm sorry.
It's also to you, Versan. Are the Hamas hostages held by Israeli military?
I think they're staging this and fabricating a lot of it.
I don't have a good answer to that. I say, well, if the Israeli military formed Hamas, then they probably have moles in the higher up, control room of Hamas. That's all Arab. And maybe some of them are not too loyal to the Arab cause and they're working with the Israelis and they're paid a lot of money with the Swiss account. Okay, there's a lot going on here.
Yeah, that's an intelligence operation for sure.
Right, but I don't know where. We've never been told where are the Hamas. If the Hamas hostages are in Gaza, why is Israel doing carpet bombing of Gaza? To me, it means the prisoners are not in Gaza.
Right.
I think the Israeli military has the Hamas hostages. This is a really screwed up, ugly, corrupt situation where they're trying to perpetuate war. I got a note, and I don't want to get off this. I don't want to forget this. Part of the Gaza war is to make sure that the Palestinian state makes no claim of the Leviathan oil and gas deposit. They call it Leviathan because it's so big. Now, you look at Leviathan in the dictionary, it's a gigantic mythical creature. Okay, Syria owns some of the Leviathan oil deposit. Jordan owns some. I think it even extends into at least toward the Iraqi border. It's in the Mediterranean. They got the Tamar floating platform that's a gas drill. It's not on trestles. It's not fixed. It's floating. And where does the oil I'm sorry, where does the gas from the Tamar floating platform go? It goes to Gazprom. Israel is supplying the Russian Gazprom. We've got hypocrites all over the place. Israel is not subject to the Russian sanctions. Now, Israel is bombing and stealing Syrian oil.
Already. That's right.
It's part of the Leviathan oil and gas gigantic deposit. Israel wants it all.
So this is about consolidating
about
and funneling all the wealth and power to the select few.
To Israel.